guys, welcome back to TacNTrack. I'm Brad, and today we're going to be talking about the German K98k. So let's get started with a little bit of brief history on the K98k and the Mauser brothers. Then we'll take a deep dive, look at the design of the K98, and we'll take a look at this DOT 1944 K98 and this rebarreled DOU Israeli K98k. So for those of you who don't know, we're going to be putting 9 World War II firearms up against one another in a championship style bracket. These challenges that these rifles will face against one another are designed to test the limits of the design, the accuracy, and adding a little bit of pressure to it, I think we'll be able to find some of the shortcomings and some of the major benefits of these rifles. We also have some handguns that will be included, as well as a single shotgun. So if this is something that interests you and you want to see more content like that, please hit that sub button down there in the bottom corner for us, because we're going to be bringing a lot more of this to you guys. So let's get started with a little bit of history of the Mauser brothers. The Mauser brothers were 2 brothers, Wilhelm and Paul Mauser, born to a rather large family. They had 13 siblings. Their father worked in the Odendorf gun factory, which is going to become important because this is a factory that later the Mauser brothers will own. Paul and Wilhelm were born in 1834 and 1838, so this is a time before the switch to metallic style cartridges, and a really interesting time for firearms. The Mauser brothers grew up in a gun-loving home. Their dad worked in the Odendorf factory, and at night he built ammunition for the guns that they produced at the factory. This allowed him to be able to provide a quality education for all of his sons, and they were able to receive education in engineering. Despite being a lower middle class family, this additional work really helped provide the Mauser brothers with a good start. Paul Mauser was the leading gun designer of the two. He designed a lot of the innovative features that we'll see later in the K98. He got started long before the K98, and we'll talk briefly about some of those firearms. But he went on to live until 1914, and he also served as a politician as well as his gun designs. So he had a big impact on Germany at the time period. So let's take a look at some of those earlier gun designs. So the Mauser brothers had a long history of making firearms, and they started at a really interesting time in history where they actually started with a single-shot bolt-action rifle that was fired using black powder. So this is just before the introduction of smokeless powder being common. So a little bit of jump from, muzzle loaders to their first rifle, which was a bolt action. Then we start seeing smokeless powder. We start seeing magazines come in worldwide, and the Mauser brothers quite often led the charge in these designs. The forefather to the K98 that we're going to talk a little bit about is the German Model 98. This was the primary infantry weapon of Germany during the First World War, and is really, really similar to these K98s that we're going to be looking at. Shared a lot of the same features, bolt designs very, very similar, and as we start looking at the details of this gun, we'll talk a little bit about some of the differences. But one of the main ones is this shorter style setup. So with the little bit of brief history knocked out of the way, let's take a look at what we all came here to talk about today. The K98k. The K98k is a Kurz 98 carbine. That's where your 2Ks come from on either side of the 98, which would tell us that this is a carbine 98 short. So let's put it into a little bit of a size comparison, since it is, quote, a short 98 carbine, and let's look at it up against this Carcano as well as this Type 38, which are both carbines of the same time period. So we'll stack those two up side by side. As we can see, both of those are significantly smaller than the K98 itself. So let's take a look at some of its American counterparts of the time period. We've got a 1903 Springfield and an M1 Garand that both have almost exactly the same barrel length. So is it really a carbine and is it really short? I don't really know about that, but it is most definitely smaller and more compact than the World War I father to this gun, the Model 98. The K98k is chambered in 8mm Mauser. This is the same round used by the Model 98. We'll also see the same round being used in the MG34 and the MG42. We'll also see some post-World War II use of both this rifle and the round. The round will also go on to serve with Egypt in the Hakims, and we'll see those floating around the Middle East, as well as these actually have been popping up in Syria here lately. So the 8mm Mauser round has stuck around for a long time, and one of the reasons for its long service life is the amount of power that this round can deliver. This will deliver around 4,000 joules on target. Now, 4,000 joules may not mean a whole lot to you, but let me put it in a little bit of perspective. A standard 9mm, even today, will deliver about 400 joules on target, meaning that the K98 and 8mm Mauser will deliver 10 times the amount of energy to a target that a 9mm will, and that's fairly impressive. So let's take a look at this rifle and how it's fed. So it's got a bolt hold open, so when this action slides back to the back and the gun's empty, it is fed via stripper clips. There is, right up here on the top of the receiver, a nice little notch cut in. It's a very simple feed mechanism, very straightforward, and one of the more reliable rifles in feeding. Take a stripper clip, slide it in these rails right here, and then take your thumb and push those rounds into the internal magazine. The internal magazine of the K98 holds 5 rounds. Now, 5 rounds at the beginning of World War II in a bolt-action rifle is a normal and acceptable amount of firepower. Now, we'll see as the war goes on and more semi-automatics like the M1 Garand enter the field of play that this rifle starts to show its age and starts to show the limitations of its design. Really, the Germans should have replaced this before the end of the war. By 43, this rifle's really dated and probably should have been replaced. However, due to the constraints in the German war economy, while they were able to replace some of these and they were able to field some semi-automatic rifles, and one of the first mainline used assault rifles in the SGG-44, the average German frontline soldier used the K98 all the way through the end of the war. And I think when we put this up in our competition, what we will see is this is a very accurate rifle, and for a bolt action is probably one of the very best to use. However, the bolt action is going to lack some firepower when put up against something like the M1 Garand that's semi-automatic and has an 8-round capacity. The 5-round capacity and the inherent slowness of the bolt is really going to kind of work against the K98. With that being said, there is a reason for these guns' reputation for being some of the best bolt guns in the world, and I think it's a well-deserved reputation. So let's talk a little bit about the K98's action and bolt. So, very simple operation, but a little bit complex in its actual design. So what we see here is a 3-position safety. We've got a fire setting right there. We flip it up. It has a safe feature that's going to disconnect the ability to pull the trigger on the rifle. However, the action's still operable. So we can still operate this rifle, take any of the cartridges out, add cartridges, whatever, but the rifle is safe. Then there's a 3rd position right here. If we flip this safety all the way over to the right side of the receiver here, we'll notice that the action doesn't work and the trigger's in a safe position. The middle setting works as the best place for disassembly. And we're not going to talk a little bit about how to disassemble the bolt, but that is the best place for disassembly. On the side of the receiver, on the left side here, we've got a latch. If we run this bolt backwards, pull this latch right here, the bolt simply comes right out of the side of the gun, making it very easy to clean. One thing to note with the K98s, they have a third of a cleaning rod that always comes with them, and it's stored right up here in the front. That cleaning rod is a third, so you and 3 of your buddies together have a cleaning rod, whereas you yourself don't. So, with the bolt out of the rifle, we'll take a look at a few unique things on the bolt. So, it is a cock on open design, which means as you go to lift it, it will actually cock the firing pin. This is going to help with extraction, because that additional effort that it takes is going to help it grab a round, and that additional force is going to help it fling the round out. So cock on opens are typically considered the best style of setup to have. You do have a few cock on closed guns, but I think without a doubt that the cock on open is superior. The next thing that we'll notice about this bolt is this very large extractor right here on the side of the bolt. This is going to be sure that the K98 grabs that round in the chamber, pulls it out every single time. One of the reasons it was rightfully claimed to be as reliable as it is this large extractor right here on the side. We also see, and we'll move this extractor over a little bit so we can see it, we've got 2 very large locking lugs here that lock this action up very, very well. And something that we don't normally talk about with bolt actions that this rifle actually does exceptionally well is divert gases. So these 2 ports right here in the bottom of the bolt are actually there to divert gases. We don't think about it today because most of the cartridges today on today's market are very, very good. But in the early 1900s, things like case ruptures were fairly common. So in the event of a case rupture where this case actually blows out, this will absorb additional gases and force it away from the shooter, protecting the shooter's eyes. It will also make it more pleasant to shoot because any of the gases that are coming through this firing pin hole here are going to be diverted away from the shooter's face, making it a much more pleasant rifle to shoot and probably a little bit more accurate by reducing the shooter's flinch. So that's the bolt on the K98. We're going to go ahead and put it back in. So let's take a look at a few of the other features on the Mauser. We're going to start all the way up here at the muzzle and we're going to work our way all the way back to the butt. So typical no muzzle device, we won't see those start coming into play real commonly till Cold War era. We do see a hooded front sight on this particular one. Now, very early German K98s didn't have the hooded front sight. It was a really good addition. Now, you'll notice the other one here on the table doesn't have one. This rifle would have been built with one. They are commonly lost. We talked a little bit about the cleaning rods. They would go right here. I've actually removed the ones from mine. I do indeed have them, but they are removed. We've got a bayonet lug up here. Bayonets were still thought to be a necessary thing in World War II. We'll really see them drop off after the war, but in World War II, they still saw the bayonet as a legitimate rifle requirement. So we've got this nice sculpted front handguard that's going to protect the shooter's hands as the barrel starts to heat up. It really fits nicely in the hand, very good design there. We'll also see our sling mount up here on the left side of the gun. These changed a little bit over time, but fairly similar. So, like with most World War II guns, our rear sight is set up for ranges that are hopelessly optimistic. So it's set up for up to 2,000 meters. I think pretty much everyone will agree that the maximum range for a K98 is going to fall somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 meters to 1,000 meters. Yet the sights are adjustable to 2,000, so a little bit far out there. The one thing that is really nice about the K98 sight in particular is most of the rifles of this time period are only adjustable in 100-meter increments. There's no real fine adjustment available. The K98's actually available with 50-meter increments on the sights, so it really helps you dial into your target a little bit better. We've got a simple blade style up here, and we've got a real nice tight notch back here in the back. I'm not sure that that would be my ideal choice in sights in a combat scenario, but as far as a shooter's marksman style setup on sights, it works quite well. So as we go back, we get the bolt that we've talked about. We do have an internal magazine down here in the bottom. Now, this magazine can come out. It's not detachable, if you will, but it can come out for cleaning of the rifle. We've got a fairly straightforward trigger setup. We've got our rear sling mount that actually goes all the way through the rifle. Now, one thing that you've probably noticed in the past on K98s makes them very distinguishable from other rifles is this big metal piece back here in the stock. A lot of people don't know what that's for. This is actually a bolt disassembly tool that will help you take your bolt apart. So this rifle is kind of a whole platform rather than just a rifle. So your bolt disassembly tool is right back here in the back of the stock. Now, as 1945 rolls around and the Germans are trying to simplify everything to get as many firearms as they can, we see some changes made in that. So this K98 here obviously doesn't have the bolt disassembly tool made into the stock, but they didn't forget about it. It's actually back here in the butt plate. Works just as well, and significantly easier and simpler to make. We see a lot of quality drop in the very late war rifles. This one's actually in exceptionally good shape and of decent quality. So that's pretty much the K98, how it operates, how it works. So let's take a look at these two rifles as individuals. Started with this. This is a DOT. It is a period correct K98 from World War II. Now, this particular rifle was purchased from Classic Firearms in one of the recent runs they did. It has a receiver code of DOT, which is Czechoslovakian made. It was made in 1944 at the Waffenwerk Brunn factory in Czechoslovakia. Overall, this rifle's in quite good shape. Bolt and action go together. It's very smooth to operate. It is a quite accurate rifle, but it's not a numbers matching rifle, which is what I actually wanted when I was looking for a K98. They're a little bit cheaper that way, and you don't feel as bad running rounds through them. And I wanted a rifle that I could shoot. But the Germans serialized every single component. I mean, every single thing on this rifle has a serial number. And not one of them matches. However, it does all appear to be period correct for a DOT in 1944. So, very excellent rifle to shoot, and a good example of what a K98 would have been like at the time. It's not missing anything, works just like it should, trigger's good, action's really nice and tight, rifling looks near brand new. Given that it was a 44 production, that's not horribly surprising. So let's take a look at this gun, because this gun has a very different history to it. So this was also a German, well, built in Czechoslovakia again. This is a DOU 45, built in Czechoslovakia for the German army. It's questionable on whether or not this rifle ever got delivered to the German army. That's who it was built for. We still see some stamps on it. But this is an Israeli K98. So At the founding of the State of Israel in 1947, Israel was looking for any firearm they could get their hands on, and they didn't care if it used to be a Nazi rifle or not. They needed rifles to defend their starting state there. So this rifle is a DOU 45. It actually appears to be mostly numbers matching. Maybe not entirely. We've got a little bit different. We've got a different bolt in the receiver. This front barrel band here doesn't match what it should. But overall, mostly numbers matching gun. However, the Israelis got a hold of these. They used them for quite a while. Then in the 1950s, when they began adopting the FNFALs, which we'll do the FNFAL. I have 2 Israeli FNFALs. So we'll talk about those in detail. We'll probably also cover the Uzi and hopefully the Galil as well. So we'll talk a lot about Israeli firearms. But the Israelis, when they adopt the FNFAL, are standardizing on a new caliber. That caliber's 308. And so as we look at 308, that's a 308 snap cap there next to 8mm. We'll notice it's a little bit smaller round, not quite as powerful, but it simplifies the logistics of having one large rifle round, so they don't have to constantly worry about what's what. So, some changes made to this gun. The receiver has been scrubbed of the Nazi markings. Now the Israelis took these, they entered these into the field. For the most part, they didn't scrub them in any kind of factory. So the removal of the marks are often quite crude, like this one, where it was probably a soldier in the field who decided to remove the markings from his rifle, often quite crudely done, like this gun. They also went through, and when they rebarreled these, they actually took the stocks here and cut in 7.62 into the stocks. That way, when it was on a rack, you could walk by, tell what was what, and know what ammunition belonged with the rifle as they were starting the transition. We also see 7.62 up here on the receiver. Now, not exactly sure why, but we do have some Hebrew markings that have been cut into the receiver of this one. It was quite nicely done. Don't know why that was, but we see some field modifications on a lot of guns that were used in combat like this. So guys, if you have any questions on the K98s, you want to see a little bit more of these guns, please comment down below. And don't forget, we've got our World War II competition coming up where we're going to shoot all of these and a few more that aren't here with us today in a competition up against one another. So please subscribe. Thanks for checking us out today on TacNTrack.